Resident Evil Survivor 2 is the second game in the Gun Survivor series that originally saw a release on the PlayStation 1 back in the year 2000. But this sequel, that's based around the events of Code Veronica, that saw originally a release on the Sega Dreamcast and later on the PS2 and other consoles, it saw a release in late 2001 on the PS2. And while this game is based on the Code Veronica story, the game itself is more of a spin-off rather than an actual addition to the original story of the game, as it utilises many of the same elements seen within the original Survivor game, but just allows you to play as the characters from Code Veronica and even the levels that were originally within the game, all from a first-person perspective. And the game utilises more of an arcade feel, where you have access to a variety of game modes, each with the ability to achieve different unlockables and even unlock different characters. You can even play as Chris Redfield, among others, where you have to complete a series of missions around different environments from the Code Veronica game itself, but all within a time limit. One of the main notable additions to this game is that it also features the Nemesis from Resident Evil 3, in which he will appear after the time period of the level that you're currently in reaches 0, and therefore the Nemesis will be released, so then he will hunt you down for the rest of the level until you complete all of the objectives and get to the end point within the level. And if he gets to you at all, he will wipe you out with literally one hit, so you have to make sure that you avoid him at all costs. Now, the game itself, upon release, didn't receive the greatest of reviews, as it generally isn't an addition or a new game in the Resident Evil storyline, but more just of a spin-off, just with arcade elements thrown in, as it doesn't have an original story. It just kind of combines a mishmash of different elements from Code Veronica and just puts it into this game. But how does it play and feel compared to other types of games, or even compared to the first Survivor game? While the first Survivor game had its own unique story arc that was in addition to the Resident Evil story lore, Survivor 2 just focuses more so on all-out arcade gameplay, with fast-paced gunfighting action and lots of explosions, where you have to eliminate many of the game's popular enemies, from zombies to hunters, lickers, and even some of the more noticeable enemies that were only seen in the Code Veronica game itself, even alongside of some of the boss characters that you also would meet in the game also. And while it was released on the PS2, graphically and in terms of the features, it was a step up from the original, but at that time, compared to more modern day FPS shooters, the control systems on a lot of these earlier games were still in refinement to some degree, as developers still hadn't quite fully figured out the best possible practice to utilise simpler control methods within these games, so it left for playing the game with using a very clunky control style that by modern standards doesn't really suit it. So if you're coming in to play this game based off of coming on playing from a game say on the PS4 or PS5 that uses more modern based controls, it will take some adaptation and time and patience to get used to and get familiar with the controls in Survivor 2. And while it may not be essentially like an add-on or a progression of the Resident Evil story plot, it is a fun arcade game to just play for a quick blast every now and then, as it does have some pretty cool features, and it's really just good to play for a quick blast, as there is a lot of replay value in the game. There's a load of different levels and areas to explore, and with the different modes that are available, each with their own mission types and processes that you have to overcome and complete to unlock many of the game's other other levels and even aspects, weapons and characters that you can again use, where they all have their own different features that can either help or aid you or hinder you depending on the playstyle. While it may not be for everybody, it will suit if you're a fan of Resident Evil, as looking back over Resident Evil's long history, there are many notable games within the franchise, but the series is also known for experimenting with different ideas and concepts, branching out onto different paths, where Resident Evil was still trying to figure out things and trying to expand its ideas into different genres. Because originally, way back when the original Resident Evil was first being developed way back in the early 90s, its initial concept was to be that of a first-person survival horror game, but due to the limitations of the PlayStation 1 hardware at the time, it was not really possible for Capcom or Shinji Mikami to create the vision that they wanted for the game, because they couldn't add in all of the ideas and concepts that they originally wanted. And it was only then when Shinji Mikami experienced the first Alone in the Dark game while Resident Evil was being developed, he realised that he would need to change his perspective to the fixed camera perspectives in order to iron out some of the ideas that they'd originally thought of. It wasn't until later consoles where they would be able to go back to the first person vision originally with the likes of Resident Evil 7 and 8 on modern consoles, but they did try it as early as the PS1 with the likes of the original Survivor game that had more light gun elements, but it even did have some arcade elements. And then even moving forward with Gun Survivor 2, where they did try to initiate that or try to test it out to see how it would get on, but again, due to the clunky controls and FPS controls back in the early days on the PS1 and PS2 were still not as refined as they are today, so there was still a lot of tweaking and a lot of ideas that needed to be ironed out before they could really start to take on a unique presence of its own. While FPS games on the PS2 were popular to some degree, the control systems meant that they weren't as easily accessible or they weren't as simple to pick up and play for most gamers, so it definitely took a while, whereas modern games today definitely make it a lot easier for gamers to get used to the game within only a couple of minutes of play. These older games would definitely take a lot more time to figure out what to do, but looking back, that was just all part of the process. Developers still hadn't figured out all the kinks, and us players just had to adapt to what we had, and we still got enjoyment out of it regardless. Now, even for myself personally, I bought and owned Survivor 2 back in the day, and I have to say now, I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though it was a very different move away from the franchise and all of the games that I had played from Resident Evil up to that point. But it was a nice break away from it for a while, even though it's not considered as good as many of the other games in the series, but definitely offered some very fun and unique elements that you could play for a quick blast every now and then. Even if you only had like 10 or 15, 20 minutes to spare, you could jump in and have a quick game and then move on and then come back to it then at a later date as and when you wanted to. So I suppose that casual element to the game definitely appealed to its nature, but due to the complexity of the game would have deterred a lot of players away from it, and even now as a result it's a quite hard game or rare game to find these days if you're looking for it online, and there is a chance that you will pay a good hefty price for it now if you want to get a physical copy. As with many rare games online these days, you can be expected to pay a lot of money for them if you want to add them to your collection. But if you are a fan of the Resident Evil series in general, which I am, I'm sure you'd be more than willing to try it out if you haven't done so already. And if you have, I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences on Resident Evil Survivor 2, and what did you really think of it back in the day? Did you enjoy the game or maybe not so much? I'd love to hear what stories you do have, so be sure to share them down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video and you would like to see more content around similar games that were released on the PS2 that would be similar to the likes of Code Veronica or even the Gun Survivor games, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated when future videos are released. And in the meantime, if you would like to see more content around the Resident Evil franchise and other games released on the PS2, you can check out this playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And I will see you all in the next one.